Take off your shoe. Just one. Hold it in your hand and look at it. Look at the sole. There is a raised heel, even if it is slight. There is a rigid arch support in the middle. There is a narrow toe box that squeezes your toes together into a shape your foot was never meant to hold. Now put your bare foot on the floor and look at it. Spread your toes. Feel how wide your foot actually is when nothing is compressing it. Those two shapes, the shape of your shoe and the shape of your foot, do not match. They have never matched. And every single step you take inside that shoe is sending a force through your knee joint at an angle that 2 million years of evolution never prepared it for. I am going to tell you what that force is doing to the cartilage inside your knee right now, why the damage accelerates after 40, and why the species that learned to walk upright built itself a knee that was destined to fail the moment it started wearing shoes. I spent decades studying how the structure of every organism reflects the forces it has adapted to. The beak of a finch matches the seed it cracks. The shell of a tortoise matches the predator it resists. The leg of a horse matches the ground it runs on. Every structure in nature is a physical answer to a physical question, and the human knee is the answer to a very specific question. How do you support the full weight of an upright body on 2 legs instead of 4, while still allowing the range of motion needed to walk, run, climb, squat, and pivot across uneven terrain for roughly 30 to 35 years without catastrophic structural failure? That is the engineering specification. 35 years, on bare feet, on natural ground. And the knee that evolution produced to meet that specification is a masterpiece. But you are not using it the way it was specified. You are using it inside shoes, on flat, hard surfaces, for 70 or 80 years. And the physics of what happens when you change the input conditions on a joint designed for a completely different set of forces is the reason your knees are failing. The joint that walks on a knife edge. Your knee is the largest joint in your body and also the most vulnerable. It is a hinge that must bear compressive loads of up to 4 to 6 times your body weight during walking and up to 8 times your body weight during stair climbing. If you weigh 180 pounds, your knee cartilage is absorbing over 1,000 pounds of force with every step you take down a staircase. And it does this through a contact area roughly the size of a postage stamp. The femur, your thigh bone, sits on top of the tibia, your shin bone. The bottom of the femur is rounded. The top of the tibia is essentially flat. A round surface sitting on a flat surface is inherently unstable. It wants to roll. It wants to slide. It wants to dislocate. The only things preventing this are the ligaments holding the bones together, the menisci cushioning the contact, and the muscles controlling the motion. There is no deep socket like the hip. There is no bony containment. The knee is held together by soft tissue and maintained by muscular control. It is, from an engineering perspective, a joint that operates on the edge of instability at all times. The cartilage covering the ends of these bones is called articular cartilage, and it is one of the most remarkable materials in the human body. It is only 2 to 4 millimeters thick, about the thickness of 2 stacked coins. It has no blood supply. It has no nerves. It has no lymphatic drainage. It is nourished entirely by diffusion from the synovial fluid that bathes the joint. When you compress the cartilage during a step, fluid is squeezed out. When you release the load, fluid is drawn back in, carrying nutrients with it. Your cartilage is fed by the act of walking. If you stop moving, your cartilage starves. If you move too much under too much force at the wrong angle, your cartilage is destroyed. The margin between healthy loading and destructive loading is remarkably thin. And here is the fact that determines everything. Articular cartilage in adults does not regenerate. The cells embedded in the cartilage matrix, called chondrocytes, are sparse and have extremely limited capacity to reproduce. Once cartilage is damaged, once the surface is worn or cracked or thinned, the body cannot rebuild it. You will never grow new knee cartilage. Every millimeter you lose is gone permanently. By the time you feel pain in your knee, you have already lost cartilage that will never come back. The pain is not a warning, it is an announcement that the damage is done. What your bare foot actually does. Now let me tell you what happens when you walk barefoot, the way your ancestors walked for 2 million years before anyone invented a shoe. When your bare foot strikes the ground, it does not land heel first. Watch anyone walking barefoot on a hard surface, and you will see it. The foot lands on the midfoot or the forefoot. The ball of the foot touches down first or simultaneously with the outer edge. The toes spread wide to distribute force across the broadest possible surface. The arch of the foot, which is not a rigid structure but a dynamic spring made of bones, ligaments, and tendons, compresses under load and absorbs energy. The ankle flexes. The foot pronates slightly inward. The entire lower leg participates in decelerating the body. This landing pattern produces what biomechanics researchers call a compliant gait. The impact force is distributed over a longer time period. The peak force is lower. The loading rate, how quickly the force rises from 0 to maximum, is gradual. The knee receives a smooth, progressive load that it can absorb and distribute across its cartilage surface evenly. Now put the shoe back on. A modern shoe has a cushioned, elevated heel. This heel tilts your entire skeleton forward. Your center of gravity shifts. To compensate, you extend your leg further in front of you during each stride, and when that extended leg hits the ground, it hits heel first. This is called a heel strike, and it is almost exclusively a product of wearing shoes. Barefoot populations around the world do not heel strike. Shod populations almost universally do. Here is the physics that matters. When your heel strikes the ground, the impact generates a transient force spike, a sharp, sudden pulse of force that travels up through your rigid shoe sole, through your heel bone, up your tibia, and directly into your knee joint in approximately 10 to 20 milliseconds. The loading rate is steep. The peak is sharp. Your knee cartilage receives a hammering impact rather than a smooth compression. Researchers at Harvard University measured this directly. They compared the ground reaction forces of habitually barefoot runners with habitually shod runners. The barefoot runners, landing on their forefeet, generated no measurable impact transient. The force curve rose smoothly. The shod runners, landing on their heels, generated a sharp impact spike at initial contact, a spike that occurred before the body's natural shock absorption mechanisms could engage. The shoe cushioning reduced the magnitude of the spike somewhat, but it did not eliminate it. And more importantly, the shoe cushioning did nothing to change the fact that the knee was receiving the load at the wrong angle, through the wrong part of the joint, in a pattern the joint was never designed to handle. The angle that destroys cartilage. This is the part that matters most, and it is the part no one explains. The elevated heel in a modern shoe does not just change when the force arrives. It changes where the force is directed inside the knee. When you walk barefoot and land on your midfoot, your knee is slightly bent at the moment of impact. The femur and tibia are angled in a way that distributes the compressive force across a broad area of the cartilage surface. The menisci, two C-shaped pads of fibrocartilage sitting on the tibial plateau, are positioned to absorb and spread the load. The contact area is maximized. The pressure per unit area is minimized. When you heel strike in a shoe with an elevated heel, your knee is more extended at impact, closer to straight. And when the knee is straighter, the contact area between femur and tibia shifts. It concentrates. The load passes through a smaller patch of cartilage. The pressure per unit area increases. And it increases on the medial compartment, the inner side of the knee, more than the lateral compartment. This is why osteoarthritis of the knee is overwhelmingly a disease of the medial compartment. Not because the inner side is weaker, because the mechanics of heel strike gait, the gait that shoes create, direct disproportionate force to the inner side of the joint. Step after step, year after year, decade after decade, a concentrated load on a small patch of cartilage that cannot repair itself. I observed in my studies of comparative anatomy that every joint in every species is loaded in the pattern that matches its evolutionary use. The hip of a quadruped is loaded differently than the hip of a biped. The ankle of a climbing primate is loaded differently than the ankle of a running predator. The joint surface, the cartilage thickness, the ligament arrangement, all of it matches the loading pattern the species evolved under. Change the loading pattern, and you change the rate of wear. This is not theory, this is observation. This is what I saw in every skeleton I examined across every species. And humans changed their loading pattern roughly 40,000 years ago, when the earliest evidence of footwear appears in the archaeological record. In evolutionary terms, that is yesterday. There has been no time for natural selection to remodel the knee for a heel strike gait. Your knee is still a barefoot knee trapped inside a shoe. Why the damage accelerates after 40. You may have walked in shoes your entire life and felt nothing wrong with your knees until your 40s. This is not because the damage was not happening. It was happening with every step. But cartilage has no nerve endings. You cannot feel cartilage wearing away. You feel pain only when the cartilage has thinned enough to expose the bone beneath it, or when the inflammatory response to cartilage breakdown products irritates the synovial lining of the joint. By the time pain arrives, the process has been underway for years, sometimes decades. But there is a second reason the damage accelerates after 40, and it comes back to evolution. The synovial fluid that nourishes your cartilage and lubricates the joint surface changes composition with age. The concentration of hyaluronic acid, the molecule responsible for the viscosity and lubricating properties of the fluid, decreases. The fluid becomes thinner, less viscous, less effective at reducing friction between the cartilage surfaces. The coefficient of friction inside your knee joint increases, and the cartilage that is already being loaded at the wrong angle through the wrong gait pattern is now also being lubricated with an inferior fluid. Additionally, the chondrocytes, those sparse cartilage cells I mentioned, become less metabolically active with age. Their ability to produce the proteoglycans and collagen that maintain the cartilage matrix declines. The cartilage does not just wear from the surface down, it degrades from within. The matrix becomes softer, more susceptible to mechanical damage. The same forces that the cartilage handled at 25 now cause microfractures in the matrix at 50, because the material properties of the cartilage itself have changed. This is the same pattern I documented across every aging biological system I studied. The material degrades while the load remains constant or increases. A 50-year-old who weighs more than they did at 25, which is most people, is applying greater force to weaker cartilage through a mechanically disadvantageous gait pattern created by footwear. Every variable is moving in the wrong direction simultaneously. The flat ground problem. But shoes are not the only unnatural input destroying your knees. The ground itself is wrong. Your ancestors walked on uneven terrain, rocks, roots, slopes, soft earth, gravel, sand, wet grass. Every step was slightly different. Every footfall landed at a slightly different angle, on a slightly different surface, with a slightly different distribution of force. This variability is not a challenge for the knee, it is a requirement. Variable loading distributes wear across the entire cartilage surface. No single patch bears the repeated concentrated load. The cartilage wears evenly, slowly, across its full area. You walk on flat, hard, perfectly level surfaces: concrete, tile, hardwood, asphalt. Every step is identical to the last, the same angle, the same impact, the same patch of cartilage bearing the same concentrated load in the same medial compartment, step after identical step, thousands of times per day, for decades. I observed this principle in the Galapagos. The marine iguanas that swam in varied ocean currents developed evenly worn claws. Captive iguanas kept on flat surfaces developed asymmetric wear patterns, damage concentrated on specific digits. The same principle applies to every biological structure under mechanical load. Uniform repeated stress destroys faster than variable stress. Your flat floors and paved roads are doing to your knee cartilage what a flat cage floor does to an iguana's claws, concentrating wear on the same point until the structure fails. What you have lost. There is something else your shoe has taken from you, and you do not even know it is gone. Your foot contains 26 bones, 33 joints, and over 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. It is one of the most complex mechanical structures in the entire human body. When you walk barefoot, all of these structures are active. The intrinsic muscles of the foot, the small muscles between the metatarsals and in the arch, fire with every step to stabilize and control the foot's shape dynamically. The proprioceptors in the sole of your foot, the nerve endings that detect pressure and position, send continuous feedback to your brain about the terrain, the angle, the loading pattern. Your brain uses this feedback to adjust your gait in real time, shifting the loading on your knee millisecond by millisecond to optimize force distribution. A modern shoe eliminates most of this feedback. The thick, cushioned sole blocks the proprioceptive signals from the ground. The rigid arch support replaces the dynamic action of the foot's intrinsic muscles with a passive plastic insert. The narrow toe box prevents the toes from spreading and gripping. Your foot, which evolved as an active sensory and mechanical organ, has been converted into a passive block inside a padded box. And your knee, which depends on the foot's feedback to optimize its loading pattern, is now operating without the information it needs to protect itself. Studies of habitually barefoot populations in Africa and South Asia consistently show lower rates of knee osteoarthritis compared to shod populations in the developed world, even when controlling for body weight and activity level. The populations that walk the most on the hardest terrain with no shoes have healthier knees than the populations that walk less on smoother surfaces with expensive footwear. The shoe is not protecting the knee. The shoe is creating the conditions under which the knee fails. The engineering verdict. I return to my fundamental observation. Every structure in nature is optimized for the forces it evolved under. Change the forces, and the structure fails. This is not a metaphor. This is mechanics. This is what happens to every biological system pushed outside its design envelope. Your knee was designed for 30 to 35 years of barefoot walking on uneven terrain. You are giving it 70 to 80 years of shod walking on flat, hard surfaces. The cartilage is being loaded at the wrong angle through a heel strike gait that shoes created. The force is being concentrated on the medial compartment by an elevated heel that shifts your biomechanics. The proprioceptive feedback that would allow your brain to optimize loading in real time has been blocked by a cushioned sole. The lubricating fluid is thinning. The cartilage matrix is softening, and not a single cell of damaged cartilage will ever be replaced. This is not aging, not entirely. This is a mismatch between the input conditions your knee was designed for and the input conditions you are giving it. You are running a barefoot joint in a shod world, on surfaces that do not exist in nature, for a lifespan that evolution never anticipated. And the joint is responding exactly the way any engineered system responds when you exceed its specifications. It is wearing out, not randomly, not unpredictably, in exactly the pattern the physics demands. Medial compartment first, cartilage thinning under concentrated load, bone responding to abnormal stress with spurs and remodeling. Inflammation following damage that cannot be repaired. Look at your shoe again. Feel how rigid the sole is. Feel the elevation at the heel. Feel how narrow the toe box is compared to your actual foot. That object is reshaping the forces inside your knee with every step. It has been doing this since you first started wearing shoes as a child. And your knee, that extraordinary joint that evolution spent millions of years refining for a barefoot world, has been absorbing the consequences in silence, without complaint, without pain, until the cartilage wore thin enough that you finally felt it. And by then it was already too late. Not because you did something wrong, because you did something your body was never built for. You put on shoes. And then you walked on flat ground, and then you did it for 50 years. Let me tell you what happens when the cartilage is gone, because this is where the story stops being about wear and becomes about your body trying to solve a problem it has no solution for. When cartilage thins past a critical point, bone contacts bone. The subchondral bone beneath the cartilage, which was never meant to bear direct load, begins to remodel. It thickens, it hardens, it becomes sclerotic, dense and white on an X-ray where it should be spongy and grey. This is your skeleton trying to build a harder surface to handle the forces the cartilage used to absorb. But bone is not cartilage. Bone is rigid. It does not cushion. It does not glide. It grinds. At the margins of the joint, where the remaining cartilage meets the exposed bone, your body does something else. It grows osteophytes, bone spurs, small projections of new bone that form around the edges of the joint surface, as if your skeleton is trying to increase the contact area, trying to spread the load across a wider surface. It is a reasonable mechanical response. More surface area means less pressure per unit area. But osteophytes grow where they grow, not where they are needed. They restrict range of motion. They press against soft tissue. They create pain in locations that have nothing to do with the original cartilage loss. And the synovial membrane, the thin lining of the joint capsule that produces the lubricating fluid, becomes inflamed. Fragments of broken cartilage floating in the joint fluid trigger an immune response. White blood cells flood the synovial membrane. It swells, it thickens, it produces more fluid, but the fluid is inflammatory, thin, and poor at lubrication. The joint that needed better fluid gets worse fluid at exactly the moment it needs help the most. This is the swelling you feel, the stiffness in the morning, the knee that takes 15 minutes to warm up before it moves without pain. That is your immune system reacting to debris from a surface that wore away under forces it was never designed to handle. I studied how organisms adapt to damage throughout my career. Every adaptation I observed had the same limitation. The body can only work with the tools evolution gave it. It cannot invent new solutions. It can only deploy the same healing responses it uses everywhere else: inflammation, bone remodeling, fluid production, and hope they are sufficient. In the knee of a 60-year-old who has been heel striking on concrete for 45 years, they are not sufficient. They were never going to be sufficient. The tools are wrong for the problem because the problem never existed in the environment where the tools evolved. And the knee that was designed for 35 years of barefoot running across the African savanna told you, in the only language it has, that the physics had finally caught up. That is what the pain in your knee is, not aging, not disease, physics. The same physics that shapes every beak and every bone and every joint in every species I ever studied. The force determines the failure, and the force changed the day you laced up your first pair of shoes.